Oh yeah, they were.
Good morning, everybody.
They were on the phone.
So they were. Yeah, they weren't in the base.
No, they made it onto the runway.
Great to
They
see
kind
you
of tripped
here.
over the end of the runway,
Yeah.
which makes sense. It's just kind of
I've written Karla's name 3 times on my cards because I am going to introduce you. And here's my first time. Here's Karla. She's here too. For our 4th week, and we're very excited about it. But before I go on, I want to say that I've been thinking quite a bit about this robot thing in the 2 or 3 weeks, and I just thought to myself, you know, not in my lifetime, so I don't really have to worry about this. But this morning, I'm not kidding, so I'm driving in, and on the radio, there's an ad by Charles Schwab. Schwab, not Schwab, not like what you do in your mouth. No, Schwab. And the ad said, you know, work with us because we're instantly going to make sure that your portfolio is fine. If it needs balancing, like instantly balanced, you're covered with us, you know, go with us. And then it said, and if you need to talk with a human, you can do that too. And then I got to thinking about that pretty girl that was on the screen last week. What was her name?
Sophia. Yeah.
Sophia. And I thought about me, and I thought about Sophia, and I thought, Sophia could totally do this job. She would not forget to introduce the speaker. She would not need a card. So now I feel like they're coming for us pretty much. But I'm going to press on as a human and see how I can do it. Next week, Liz Rodriguez is going to be here, and she's going to talk about immigration narratives. You can register for it. It's a one-time session, and you can register during break with Judy. And then following that, Ross Hanfer, also of the Sociology department, is going to talk about kids these days. And you can register for that 3-session course, and that's $10. And you can also do that during break. There are, you may have noticed, you may have sat on them, evaluation forms and pens. And we would love for you to fill those out and take them out to the table during break or at the end of the session to give Karla and us some feedback. And if you're using a T-coil, it's time to turn it on. We've all turned off our phones, haven't we? It's always worth saying one more time. And then when we do a question and answer, if you'll hold the mic right up to your mouth, even though it sort of feels kind of like naturally you don't want to do this, really do it because that's the best sound that we can get out of this microphone. And now, for the 4th time, our speaker, Karla Erickson.
A very clever introduction. I know from talking to some of you personally and then by email and such that you kind of have been infected by seeing robots and AI everywhere, right? Which was one of my goals, so check. Yeah, so I'm always interested in those examples, so please stay in touch as we wrap up our work together. I also want to say I think you're really lucky to have Liz and Ross coming up, both fantastic newer colleagues, like 5 years and under. They're both wonderful storytellers, particularly. This is one of the main selling points with my mother of trying to get her to move to Grinnell. I send her these videos and I say, you too could be taking these classes. So I am going to continue with the goal of talking slower. I did get some feedback that maybe I succeeded a little bit last week, so that's going to be my goal. Okay. So thinking about, mainly I'm going to talk today because I feel a kind of urgency to pull out some of the threads that we've been working on throughout our semester. If you talk to my students, they would say, my classes are kind of like this. That there's a kind of nice slow build and then there's like, and this at the end. So I'll try to not actually talk fast, but I'm going to leave you with a little bit more of a smattering of ideas. I would say that last class session was kind of argument driven, right? My argument was the idea that this isn't going to have a profound job effect is a little absurd, right, given what we know. So that was an argument-driven piece, and I hope that I brought that home. But today it's going to be a little more like pastiche to talk a little bit about, well, this is one way to think about the social life of machines, this is another way. So the reason I call this the social life of machines, and again, I just want to thank you, like, in between every week, based on conversations with you, I'm up late writing, because it has really helped me to have people to talk through these ideas with, so I want to thank you for that. But I'm calling this the social life of machines because this is what I see in the rhetoric. I see reading the current tea leaves, right? Did you say FedEx has the robot? Right, yeah, so FedEx has a robot they're practicing having deliver things, right? So you'll see that and you'll be like, oh, so we have our first robot delivery worker that people are trying to get online. And you look at that and you think, wow, that's going to have implications for work. And then what happens in the rhetoric and the discourse for me a lot, in terms of what I read, is they jump to these really big nerdy questions that are like, when is the singularity going to happen? And the singularity is when machines are smarter than us. And I want to say, pause, let's just stop and think about that one robot, right? Because let's just pretend there's only going to be one of them. And think about what his consequences are, right? And think about how our social life is going to change because of that one robot. Because I think we tend to leap over and we try to say, well, when will all drivers be eliminated? Well, we don't know the answer to that question, but we also know that if 10% of drivers are going to be eliminated, that already has consequences, not just for those drivers, but for all of us, for how we think about the road, for how we think about driving and safety, right? So that's what I mean when I mean like social life of machines. And you'll remember that I started the course by talking about a microwave, because I thought, well, these days, what could seem less interactive than a microwave, right? Like, it just sits there, and you push a couple buttons, and it warms food up. It's pretty explicit what it does. It's a very narrow machine, right? But even that had consequences for social life, right? And then you move forward to thinking about computers and cell phones. Wow, right? The social effects of those machines are profound. So I'm going to ask you to think about that a little bit, and then to offer some ways of thinking about machines having a social life, and how our social life will be affected by their arrival. Okay, so let's start with the cell phone. The first cell phone, 1973. Remember, they were huge. Only rich people could afford them. They would carry in like their tote bag with their fancy phone and then put their huge phone up to their face. That's how phones started. This is actually a small early version. And then they went all the way to flip phones. Became really big in 1989, so a bunch of us in the room had those, right? Remember those? Some of us still have them. I'm sorry, I didn't want to put that in past terms. Okay. Here he is. This is back when it was elites talking, right? This is Gordon Gekko from Wall Street. You remember that movie? The phone was almost like a character in that movie when you go back and look at it, because it was so snazzy to have one of those phones. Because many of us wouldn't have seen one of those phones until we watched Wall Street, if we watched it. Now it's a normative toolbox, right? Kids know how to use it. They are better at using it than we are. Yeah. So I think for many of us, like, our phones have capacities that our children or grandchildren know about that we may not even know about, right? They're pretty complex machines. 2007 is the first iPhone. This is not the first iPhone, but the iPhone changed things quite a bit. So it's not just about the iPhone, it's about its competitors. But it started to have a different kind of capacity expectations, different relationship to laptops, right? Like, in many ways, we're starting to carry a laptop in our pocket at that moment. So I just wanted you to sit in your own thoughts for a couple of minutes and think about any of these three questions, whichever is most interesting to you. When you think about your phone, whether it's a flip phone or one of these styles, I want you to think about how this device has improved your life or made it easier, what new activities, and I really mean activities, it makes possible, and what's been altered. So is there anything that you no longer do because of that device? If you're struggling, you may want to think about these applications, if you recognize them by icon, and how they might have affected you. So just think about that. And Janet, maybe we can do a couple of answers if you don't mind. one. So let's start with the first question. Can we hear from just two people? What has this device for you personally made easier? What's a clear win? Like, what's easier for you? Yeah.
It's a security measure. Wherever you go, you know you have a phone to be able to notify someone.
Thank you. I think that's so true because doesn't it kind of feel like, how did people meet up in busy cities without these things? I don't recall. It's like a capacity I've lost, right? Like, so that sense of like, you can reach out to people, right, if things don't go to plan, right? Yeah, so, thank you. Okay, so definitely security, always with you, you can reach and be reached. What else?
Last fall, I got the Bridges app through the library,
Yeah.
because patron here.
Yeah.
So I've always got a book with me to read, no matter where I am.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I also use it for my alarm clock.
you do? Okay, so two things. So two, and they're with you, you know, and so then you have, like, so because you use it as your alarm clock, if you travel, you have your alarm clock with you, right? We didn't used to bring our alarm clocks, well, most of us did. And then, I mean, for many of us, that's a fantasy of our childhood, right? That kind of instant access to books. Like, if you're a reader, it's amazing. Right? And books are compressed, so you can bring more of them with you without hurting your back. So that's a lot, right? What about new activities that it made possible? So reading, it just expanded. You were already a reader, so expanded that. But what about new activities that it made possible? Can we hear a couple answers to that?
Every day somebody says, well, ask your phone, when was so-and-so born, or how old is so-and-so. You know, information that in a casual conversation you wonder about, you can find out instantly. I've got a weather app that when you bring it up, it tells you what the weather's going to be. It used to be I'd go outside and look. I think I was probably as accurate as the weather forecast. One thing I noticed yesterday on that was that at the bottom it says by Watson. That's IBM's IA program, and it's pretty accurate. It's just going to start raining in 10 minutes, and sure enough, 10 minutes
I have
later it
not
starts
noticed
raining.
that. Thank you. Great examples, yeah. So new levels of weather knowledge, and just that little curiosity that you have that in a prior era you would have had to actually go to the library and research it. You're not that curious, right? That's probably not going to happen. But then now you can just, it's at your fingertips, right? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know how long this was possible, maybe even before the iPhone, but I can FaceTime now with my grandson who's in Brazil.
Amazing, right? Like, it's just beautiful, yeah. And so, I mean, cell phones have helped enormously with the cost of international calls. So, like, most people can afford to call internationally if they have a phone. Or once you have a phone, you can. Yeah, the FaceTime, the connection of the face versus just the voice is profound. I think that's I'm glad you brought that one up because it's such a big one. I love when I see my students walking around with their laptops like this, going to class, talking to grandparents in different countries. What has it ended? Okay, we got one already. You used to go outside. What else has it ended, or what do you no longer do because of your phone?
Personal contact.
Say it again.
Personal contact.
Personal contact, person to person. It may have diminished person to person contact. Right?
It's, was sort of alluded to, but going to the library and looking stuff up, or even at home in the dictionary or other reference books, because it's so easy to do on there.
Good point. I mean, encyclopedia, definitely. Thesaurus, right? Like all those kinds of resources, definitely. Not to say that you can't get encyclopedic type knowledge, but often when you're turning through an encyclopedia, different things happen than just finding that one entry, right? And now you would do a direct search to it. Yeah, go ahead.
My grandchildren no longer read my handwriting.
Yes, okay, big one. Big one, no, this is huge, and we're not really teaching handwriting anymore in the same way that we used to for that very reason, right? Yeah, so there's a lot of de-skilling around handwriting and the reading of handwriting.
We can carry one object in our purse instead of a bunch. I love the map, the GPS, the camera.
Exactly.
Think of all the stuff we used to have to carry when we traveled.
Totally. And nobody ever had their camera when they needed it, right? I mean, that's just a fact. Navigational is huge, right? Navigational is huge. In all the ways, like it gets us places faster and more cleanly, but then if we lose contact with our device, we often don't know where we are. Brought us to where we are, right? Like, so there's a lot of that. Let's take one more.
I keep track of all our great-grandchildren daily.
Yes, thank you.
There's something-
Daily, right?
Daily.
How do you do it daily?
I just look at it, because they're
Yeah.
posting pictures of
Our grandchildren are posting pictures of their children. And those are our grandchildren. We'll have a daily update.
It's these lovely touches, you know, it's like the FaceTime and then also Facebook or whatever social media platform, sharing of photos, right? I'm pretty certain we didn't share this amount of photos with one another. So there's a lot of good to come of that, a lot of connection. Thank you. So I hope that in the last 3 weeks I've encouraged us to turn our attention from if to how. The next machine age is coming, right? And I hope that I've also encouraged you to take in writing and other sources that focus a little bit more on like preparing and that kind of thing rather than just debating when, because I think when is a little bit of a divergence. It just distracts us because nobody has a good answer to when, and so like I think when we spend a lot of our juice trying to figure out when these various things are happening, in the meantime we're not preparing, right? Like we're not doing the things that we could be doing in the short run. And then the big one for today, if there is a takeaway for today, is I want to kind of shift the thinking away from solely thinking about what will they be like, the artificial intelligence and the robots, to think about how we will be in relationship to them, and what them being with us will help us see about ourselves or know about ourselves. Okay? So that's kind of what I mean when I mean the social life of machine. It's kind of a phrase that I'm just pushing because it doesn't exist. We don't have a notion of the social life of machine. Okay, so here's 2 good examples. At the end of today, I have a handout of recommended sources and movies and things like that. If you did happen to see Bicentennial Man back in the day in '99, it might be kind of an interesting show to see now. I think it's on Netflix for free. And I'll show you a little piece of that. And then Humans is a series from 2015 that a lot of the artificial intelligence designer folks, they kind of like it. Because they say it brings up some of the ethical questions that AI brings up. So if you're into like sci-fi stuff, I just wanted to show you these 2. And also they're kind of interesting because they're 15 years apart. So these 2 clips are the moment of meeting your personal robot who's going to live with you. Okay? So this is 1999's version of about our time, of about right now.
Nice place, huh? Come on, you guys, I've got a surprise for you. Yep.
What is it, Daddy?
Wait, wait, wait.
He gets the remote. Whoever brought up remotes on the first week.
Northbound Robotic, South South Line, NDR 114, serial number 583625. Pen number. Are you one's family?
I guess so.
Scary. It's not scary, it's stupid. So you're Kate McAllister. We're all the same. What is it? It's an android. What's an android?
Will that be one's name?
Well, why not? Sounds good. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, sir.
All right. So that's Meeting the Robot in 1999. Do you recognize the actor?
Yeah.
Robin Williams. Yeah. Unfortunately, we lost him.
The brand new synthetics and a domestic profile installed. This is the best thing you will do for your family.
Hello, Joe. I don't want one when the kids... You're taking it back.
I'm not taking it back.
One of these bad boys can do 10 times what the D-series can do.
I'm happy with the one I've got.
You brought it into the house and we don't know anything about it.
It's a machine.
You claim there are a handful of synthetics who can think and feel.
You're pretending to be so much less than what you are.
We can't keep insisting that they are just gadgets. We've made them more than that.
I can't believe you, George.
The human in a machine, the lines are blurring.
What the hell are you? Run!
I'm watching you. I'm watching you too, Laura.
That's scary. So another thread in a lot of science fiction representations of human-like machines, androids, is that often the movie starts like in really interesting and kind of juicy ways for me as a social scientist. We're really thinking about interaction, we're thinking about romance, we're thinking about intimacy, we're thinking about parental authority, you know, like basic things about social life. Like what would it mean to bring in a new party to your family that's not human? And they play out a lot of those things for about 20 minutes, and then the whole thing turns into a war game, right? And it's kind of disappointing for those of us that are interested in those social questions, right? And so one of the reasons I would sort of recommend Humans is that one of the story arcs I think is really fascinating, and that is that William Hurt plays one of the inventors of these machines, and he is mourning the slow death of his early model. So he's living with an early model, and he's trying to hide it from the people who are coming to reclaim it. So he's developed like this relationship with an early model, and it's very interesting that even though he's an inventor, he doesn't want the new version. So that's one of the storylines that's more interesting, but sex also comes into it, desire on the part of the adolescent boy towards that beautiful thought. So there's a lot of social issues that come up. You can see that there's some violence too, so I'm not saying it's immune to that tendency, but it's kind of an interesting show. This is a show that has done a lot of damage, I think, to the notion of robots and artificial intelligence. It's Terminator. This is kind of everybody's worst nightmare. A lot of people saw it. It was a very popular show in 1984. It's also a robot that's been kind of like authorized by the state, you know, so it has police power behind it too, and so it's a very scary creature. And they did a beautiful job of it slowly losing its skin and kind of revealing what it was, that it was a machine. So it's an interesting movie, but it's super violent. So know that if you haven't watched it before. Robot and Frank, I really recommend to you. I think it's a quiet kind of sleeper movie that's really interesting around these questions. I think I put it on your recommendation list. It's a 2012 piece. This gentleman, his son sends him a robot against his will. You know, so it arrives, he keeps trying to turn it off. And then a relationship between he and the robot begins. So it's a very interesting movie. It also has some like silliness and some hijinks that I think are totally unnecessary. But it is an interesting film and well acted. So robots are among us in many ways already, and I just wanted to build on the Robot and Frank piece and the elder care robots to think about the prospect of kind of combining global aging and robots.
She was aging all her life.
So this is from the BBC, just a gentleman who's trying out a robot.
Is loneliness a big problem amongst your generation?
I mean, you know they are, because no one ever goes to visit them. You know, they never see no one, you know. And they go down to town about once a week or twice a week to some shopping, and that's their life, you know.
What about the idea of a robot for a companion?
What's that, male or female?
Did you hear him? He said male or female.
Hello, Peppa.
Hello.
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 Oh, dear.
We could do this forever.
I know we could.
The elderly population is growing. It's a real problem. And there's not enough young people to actually support that elderly population. So there's this demographic time bomb.
Do you want to dance with me?
What dance?
Oh, okay. I'll dance alone.
No.
Bill's taking to so I think there's potential if we could get them to talk properly with us, then it could be a great companion for people.
What else do you do?
The robot can appear in many ways to be empathic and be helpful. And it could well be they could form a relationship with empathic robots. But of course the robot doesn't form any relationship with them because it's just a machine.
So Pepper, that robot that you're seeing right there, is deployed in a lot of airports around the world and some airports in the United States. So it's already like a concierge type robot, and they're trying it out to think about it as like an elder companion robot. The paraseals have been in place much longer. You will have seen these, I think. And the research on them is quite good. They're mainly used in memory units, so this piece is about memory.
Paraseal is...
Sorry, just a second. That did not go well. Let's relaunch that. And I'm going to turn it up in a minute.
Paraseal is a therapeutic robot that is used to engage people.
Sorry, I don't know why I won't see.
The benefits of the paraseal are that it engages a person living with dementia, and it gives them the opportunity to give and receive unconditional love, and in so doing increases their sense of well-being, which is essential for person-centred care.
Bob, I'm going to pull this out.
Some days that Lee has
Is that okay?
a bad day.
My computer was freaking out. We were going for 4 of 4 with no technological fails. But okay, there we go.
And it seems to just calm her down.
Sorry about this. Okay. I'm not going to go full screen. I'm just going to leave it like this.
Paraseal is a therapeutic robot that is used to engage people living with dementia. The benefits of the paraseal are that it engages the person living with dementia, and it gives them the opportunity to give and receive unconditional love, and in so doing increases their sense of well-being, which is essential for person-centred care.
It's cool.
Well, some days that Lee has a bad day, she will isolate herself in her own room. She won't come out and interact with other residents because she gets a bit agitated. When Lee becomes agitated, we will bring out Paro, our interactive seal, and she will sit there and quietly pat him and interact with him, talk with him, and it seems to just calm her down.
There's lots of reasons why Paro works. First, it's his cuteness. That's the first visual contact they have. Then the touch is so important, and that he responds to their touch. So it's all these nurturing feelings that come out in the residents. And then of course stroking him, they settle. We have minimal behaviours there. If a behaviour has escalated, Paro can come in and de-escalate that behaviour, and it continues on. It's not just while he's there, it has a flow-on effect. We do have a pet therapy program. However, Paro fits that bill and more. One of the reasons is because with a pet, their emotions do come into play, or a resident may have had a nasty experience with an animal, where Paro is non-confrontational, no preconceived ideas, and he's there responding for as long as they want.
So, I mean, I'm sensitive to, let me turn this down, to the fact that this is a promotional video, right? So they're trying to sell this product to other elder facilities, but on the other hand, you really see it, right? You really witness it, that in part it's what the seal's doing, but it's also what it makes possible in her own experience, right? Having the pairs, you can see it kind of, right? Like there's a comfort effect that is viewable, I guess. And so I wanted you to see that because those are really in place in the research on the effects, especially for memory units where you're dealing primarily with dementia, have been really profound. So it's kind of a tried and true therapy. You can also imagine that, you know, having written in the past about elder communities, that the battle to have one's pets with you is a really big battle across the country and I'm sure around the world for people who are connected to their pets. So this has a lot of the advantages of a pet, but it fits better into a sterile medical environment. It doesn't need a handler, so it can be available 24/7. And when you're dealing with memory change, you know, 24/7 is where it's at, right? Like it's not necessarily at noon, right, when you need some comforting. So there's a lot to recommend. The Paraseal, and I just think there's so much in that video where they're kind of talking about the effects that, and that maybe those effects could, on an optimistic side, be complementary to humans. So what I mean by that is if she's having a day where she doesn't want to see her friends, maybe if you give her the seal, then in like 30 minutes she does, right? Because she's like feeling calmer and feeling kind of warmed up. So it wouldn't necessarily be in place of. And I like to play it up against that more awkward example of Pepper where the guy's saying, well, what else do you do? And then the robot's like awkwardly dancing by himself. I mean, there's something going on there, but I don't think it's a complete social interaction in the way that this one kind of looks like a satisfying interaction with the robot. The tactile, the effects of the tactile, you know, and the cuteness. Like, let's not undersell cuteness. So what are some of the things that will happen as robots and artificial intelligence come deeper into our lives? We'll get used to it. There will be some dependencies, as in the navigational example that we just gave. It's great that you don't have to carry your map, but it is true that if you depend on navigational tools on your phone, you may have less of a tactile sense of where you actually are if those break down. My favorite example of this is from the show The Office. Did any of you watch The Office? This was early into GPS devices where kind of everybody felt like they needed to have a GPS device in their car. And in a famous scene, Michael and Dwight are in the car, and they're heading into a lake. And Dwight is screaming, stop, stop, and Michael's screaming, I can't, she's telling me to go forward, and they just drive directly into a lake. So it's kind of a dramatization of what happens when we rely on our tools, because there's a way that we kind of turn parts of our brain off, right? So that's what I mean by dependency. We will become more like them, and they like us, so I'll say a little bit more about that later. And we will, if we don't remake the social contract, turn on each other. So the reason that I say it that way is what I don't like about so many of these Hollywood depictions is like a robot comes into the world and there's some positive benefit from it, and then it turns into this monster and it starts trying to kill the family that it's living with, right? And it's like a very predictable arc. What I think is more important is if robots come into our world, we're gonna have to renegotiate some things, right? Like I don't think war is inevitable. I don't want to believe that, but it's going to take some kind of mature consideration of what the social consequences are of these like beings being a bigger part of our lived reality. And then later we might lose control of them. I mean, people who are in the know, who work on artificial intelligence say, like, look, we're building something that's smarter than us. So if you were inside a box and you were smarter than the person that was trying to keep you in it, how long would you stay inside, right? So there is that question, but I mean, a lot of energy gets sent to that question. I think there's a lot of in-between stuff that ordinary citizens can think on and take action around without being artificial intelligence experts themselves, right? So what are the pros of artificial intelligence that we know of right now? Like, what do we know right now? So we know that when machines do things, they tend to be, once they master something, they have fewer errors than us. Right? Even when we're experts, we make errors. They're not clouded by emotion. There's a little bit of debate if human affect of the programmer, the person who writes the program, might leak in there a little bit, but in general, they're less emotional than us, let's just say that. They're really good at evidence-based decision-making, and we know that that's really important in particular contexts. Their speed of decision-making is way better than ours. They have no ambivalence. And they make work easier and always have, right? Both in terms of the physical sense, which I think we're used to relying on a dump truck, right? Like that's easy. But also in the sense of managing enormous amounts of information simultaneously. So their brains have a capacity load that ours don't. It saves the important stuff for us. In an ideal world, that's what it would mean, right? Like it would take the heavy lifting and leave the more creative, connective kind of work for us. Do the dangerous stuff for us, that's a big one. And then from a labor vantage point, they don't take breaks, they don't have disputes, they don't form unions. So there's some advantages for employers. The cons are hackability. I was interested this week, many of you have noticed things about AI and the robots this week. Two things I noticed was there was a plane crash in which a lot of people lost their life, and it was because of an autopilot error, right? Grinnell College with Oberlin and Davidson was hacked, and so the system that we used to collect admissions materials was hacked, and students were emailed asking for money to get their own admissions file. So that happened just this week to Grinnell and a couple of other schools. The only reason I bring up those two examples is when I think of cons, I think the crimes are going to change, right? Like aircraft carriers, which we've built for a long time now, do not have anything to do with cybersecurity, right? I mean, so the ways we need to protect our nation are quite different than they have been in the past. And then also the accidents are different, right? Like so that plane going down and all those people losing their lives is a different kind of accident, right? Some other potential cons. It alters our relationship to ourselves, right? If we get more and more used to kind of machine standards, it may change how we think about human standards. Thanks, Jan. It may lead us to distrust emotion. As we get into a world in which those, you know, the one we listened to last week where she makes the reservation for you, for your dinner reservation or whatever, if we get used to those cleaner interactions in which there's no confusion and everything is kind of smooth, will we start to not like the messiness of humans with their feelings and their ambivalence and their, right, like all of that. It could run the risk of devaluing human effort, but the flip side of that is a lot of people think there will be a revaluing of human effort. So that could go either way. And then these are all kind of together for me, and then we'll take a break. But these are things that I think about as a labor scholar. We know as a teacher, humans learn things. We don't just evolve across generations. We evolve and develop as humans in part by failing, right? Like falling on our face. Like a lot of creativity actually comes out of accidents, mistakes, right? And so machines that's not part of their regime, you know? Messing up, making mistakes, making bad decisions, that's part of our regime, right? And so I don't know what the effects of those are, but I do think we need to think about a world in which effortful failures, right, are more rare for some of the workers, because the workers are machines. Even the designers say, look, there's a little bit of inherent conservatism in artificial intelligence because they're very mission driven. So like if you tell artificial intelligence to complete a task, they mainly complete a task. If you tell me to complete a task, I'm going to get a cup of coffee, have a conversation, tell a story, complete the task. Now that's not great from an efficiency model, but I'm building a social world on the way to that task, right? And so there's kind of an inherent conservatism and perhaps a reduction of creativity because machines are so not destructible. And then the dependency and the de-skilling that we've been talking about all along. So let's take a break and come back at 10:02. Again, that's not meant to end conversation. I'd like to continue it. I also wanted to say I'm teaching a course in the fall called Work in the New Economy. It'll be a seminar. It'll have 15 students in it or so. I hope to include this presidential candidate in the class that I'm going to introduce you to if you don't already know about him. But I'd be real happy to set something up community-based as part of that class. So if any people have ideas about how we could have a conversation between my students and this group, that would be interesting. So anyways, I'm just putting that out there too. I wanted to do in the spring a sociology of robots. I was ready to go with that. But we didn't have room in the schedule, so that'll be in a future year. Because I really feel like obviously it's very important for all of us in this room to be thinking about this and to have some perspective and some plans, But I think it's really important for 18 to 22. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of Andrew Yang, so Andrew Yang, who is a candidate for president in 2020, he's sometimes included in the candidates, sometimes not, but I hope that he'll develop more prominence. I'm going to tell you a couple of things about him today. One of the ways that he taught me in his book, which is called The War on Normal People, and it's on your recommendations list, is that he had this interesting list, and this is the list where he's saying, like, look, I'm telling you, I'm an entrepreneur, and when you install the robots, we're going to be the losers in that labor tussle. You know what I mean? That's kind of what Andrew was saying. So he's not in favor of the robots kind of being more employable than us, but these were some of the ways that he listed this, and I kind of give Andrew credit for welcoming me into thinking about the comparative social traits of robots versus us. So these are from his list. He has a very long list. If we were workers and we were making a case for ourselves up against robots, we require training, we need to rest, we require healthcare, at least right now, because we don't have a single payer system, so our healthcare is tied to our employment. We are imperfect and have no plans of becoming perfect anytime soon. We want to spend time away from work. I really liked this one, right? Like we are trying to get away from work. We are trying to get home or get somewhere else. We are distracted. We take breaks. We come with no warranty. And our software does not upgrade easily. So some of you have been saying, well, what can I do and what should I read next and that kind of thing. I'd really recommend to you the Future of Life Institute. That's also on your list, I believe. It is a group of designers and experts who are interested in what they call beneficial artificial intelligence, and it is the idea that the premise of artificial intelligence is we should apply it in ways that are helpful for humanity, and we should not deploy the ways that are not helpful. You know, that there is choice making. That just because we can build it doesn't mean we're going to. So that's kind of the beneficial artificial intelligence movement. So if you're interested in reading more, Future of Life is a place to go, but also just putting in beneficial AI will get you to some of those people who have positions on which AI we should implement. And the ethics of it. Thank you. Yes, exactly. So that's a group that I've started to pay attention to. When he was alive, Stephen Hawking was part of it, for example. So, artificial general intelligence you're going to hear a lot about. I started to talk about it on the first day. That's just the idea of superintelligence. It's the moment where instead of just being good at making a dinner reservation for us, this is a machine that can do most of the things that an average human can do. The issue with artificial general intelligence is as soon as the computer can do that, it will become more intelligent than us really quickly, because anything that's that smart is kind of self-improving, right? So when, of course, about artificial general intelligence is an interesting question, but from my perspective, not the key question. Some think that the moment that a computer beat a human at Go, and I'm going to show that to you in a minute, was a crucial signpost that we are approaching artificial general intelligence. But on the flip side, I think when questions are just kind of specious, and I give this example, that Wilbur Wright said in 1901, I think we're 50 years away from flying. And they were 2 years away from flying, and he was better positioned than anyone else to know that. Right? So these guesses about when and if and what, we can do that, but I think our time would be better spent preparing, honestly. Okay, I showed you the paraseal, which for me is on one of the more positive ends, and then I also wanted to show you some of the really promising developments in medicine, because I think a lot of us, we don't know a ton about artificial intelligence, and here, artificial intelligence in medicine are like, whoa, like I don't want my human doctor replaced by, by an AI. But there are strategic ways that AI is already being used that are pretty compelling, so I just wanted to show you one of those.
This is how a radiologist diagnoses pneumonia.
84-year-old female, shortness of breath period, frontal and lateral views of the chest period.
This is an algorithm called ChecksNet that's trained to do the exact same task. And this is how it performed against 6 doctors analyzing 50 chest x-rays for pneumonia in a recent test at Stanford. ChecksNet is one of many projects exploring how artificial intelligence can take over tasks normally done by doctors. And it has some radiologists worried that AI could one day replace them. That's because algorithms are getting really good at interpreting images and diagnosing disease, sometimes with greater accuracy than humans.
We'll take a picture of this x-ray. The model will then run within a few seconds to output all these diseases, and they're sorted by the order most likely to least likely.
ChecksNet was given tens of thousands of images and told which ones have pneumonia and which don't. Then it trained itself to recognize patterns and identify pneumonia in new X-rays. This process is called deep learning. In 2016, computer scientist Geoffrey Hinton, also known as the godfather of deep learning, put radiologists on notice.
People should stop training radiologists now. It's just completely obvious that within 5 years, deep learning is going to be better than radiologists.
Part of the reason guys like Hinton say radiologists are replaceable is because they often work behind the scenes. Say you go to the emergency room with a really bad cough. The ER physician will order a chest x-ray, which is then read by a radiologist who gives a report back to the ER physician. Vice News spoke with Dr. Matt Lundgren, a radiologist at Stanford who's helping to develop new
Okay, so I'm going to get us out of that. Part of what I wanted you to see was just that example of machine learning, how necessary the big data sets are, right? So, as I've said before, machines eat data, right? They need data to be fed, to learn, and you see that learning, and you see that already, you know, slightly better accuracy than humans, and then you can imagine that since this machine never sleeps and it can study all 24 hours when it's not working, that it'll be upping its efficiencies, right, its accuracy, while humans will level off, right, on reading radiology. Also, you see that machines don't see the same way as us, right, like they see differently. Yeah.
Well. I find myself reacting because in instances both for myself and my wife, after reading MRIs, radiologists noticed something that was not necessarily the main part of the image, but was kind of there, and said there's something not right, and it then followed up, which then showed some disturbing things, and you know, that's where it's like, no, they're not going to replace radiologists completely.
So I'll repeat so that people can hear what you're saying. Thank you. So you said in your case, for both you and your wife, you've had MRIs in which not the main thing, like not the yes, no, pneumonia, no, but something else in the scan was not quite right, and that helped lead down a road to diagnosing something else that was wrong. And so you would worry about, like, this is a narrow sense of reading radiology, right? So you would hope that they don't go too soon, that the radiologists aren't eliminated. I agree entirely. You know, I mean, medicine is both an art and a science, right? It's not a 0-1 prospect, right? Yeah. We should get JR in here. Okay. Also, I did want to point out that Jared Weinman at the college who works in computer science is an expert on robot perception. So he might be somebody to bring. Frightening AI dilemmas. So the question of when a machine reaches human-level general intelligence is somewhat pointless. I mean, it's an interesting question, it's a meaty intellectual question, but I'm not sure it's answerable. Everything that machines do in a narrow way, they do better than us. So if a machine were able to develop a general intelligence like ours, it would certainly teach itself immediately, improve itself, and surpass us generally in ways they currently surpass us narrowly, right? This development could happen pretty quickly, and the question of how to contain such a superintelligence is a real dilemma. So what I'm saying is it is a real dilemma, it's a scary dilemma. It's not the kind of dilemma that I'm going to work on, right? Like, I'm interested in the more short-range stuff, the immediate stuff, the stuff in view, the stuff that we have some answers to, and that we have, you know, past experience can help inform how we react. So to think about some of the ways that artificial intelligence might react differently than previous machines, ways that the past may not be helpful. This is an example of some chatbots, and to tell you the truth, I still struggle to understand exactly what chatbots are in terms of an existence. But this is like two chat boxes talking to each other, so that's what you're going to be seeing. It might be a little confusing, but I'll explain it.
I can everything else. Alt and zero to meter.
It sounds like gibberish, but it's an exact reading of an online dialogue conducted by two chatbots in a Facebook research lab. Researchers designed chatbots that would communicate with one another and engage in negotiations. The bots began communicating in standard English, but then veered off into using English words in non-standard sequences, in effect creating their own private communication code. Researchers eventually reprogrammed the bots to speak standard English, not because they perceived any danger, but because they wanted the bots to be intelligible.
Open the pod bay doors,
I'm afraid I can't.
You see how Hollywood gets used a lot, right? Okay, so I don't have the technical capacity to explain to you how the heck that happened. I just wanted you to see an example of like some of the things that like microwaves don't do, right? Like microwaves do not invent their own language that we don't know and talk to each other in it, right? Okay, so to me this is a really, when I think about, so sometimes as an experiment my students and I think about if we were trying to write a textbook in 2060 looking back, what will be those important moments? And I think most of the people who study this stuff will say that this moment is important, so I just wanted you to see this one before we wrap up our work together. It could be Jeopardy, this one's going to be Go.
Human beings have played games against computers. At first, computers struggled, but then they started winning.
Watson, what is greed? Yes.
And now they've become so dominant that they're raising doubts about the future of humanity. The latest emblem for existential dread is Google's DeepMind project, which created AlphaGo, an AI program that's become unbeatable at the most complex strategy game on the planet. While the game of checkers has 10 to the power of 20 possible outcomes, and a game of chess has 10 to the power of 40 possible outcomes, Go has more than 10 to the power of 80 possible outcomes. AlphaGo is trained to analyze situations itself by breaking the game down into tiny parts and visualizing all possible moves. Last week, I played the world's best Go player, 19-year-old Ko Jin, with the help of a human handler. AlphaGo beat him 3 times, and after doing what it was designed to do, retired from the game.
在这次比赛完之后，在他继续又不停的进步之后，我觉得他对我而言就是100%。
If a system like AlphaGo can learn all the moves in Go well enough to beat a person, then it has the potential to replace lawyers and accountants among dozens of other jobs. It might be perfect, but it has no way to navigate human politics. The Chinese government banned the live stream after Zhe lost the first game. The loss to an American company was an attack on the country's pride.
The Chinese government has made a big effort to proclaim that they are moving ahead rapidly in artificial intelligence, that they will be the people who dominate AI. To have the dreaded Google come in and beat China at its own game, it's just piling insults on top of insults. It's kind of amazing.
But it was more than a national crisis.
对我而言就是个危机的上帝。阿尔法狗出现之后，可能真的我对人生啊，包括不是仅仅为钱，对人生啊也有巨大的一个改变和看法。
So the timeline on these games is here, right? And the reason that I bring up games is they're really important to the origins of machine learning, because machine learning began with one scientist's attempt to teach his checkers, his checkers program to beat him. And so you see these developments kind of coming quickly. And Jeopardy for a long time felt like kind of the peak just because of the cultural knowledge and the kind of nuance. And there's so much nuance in just answering with a question, for example, right? It seemed like a really big leap, right, from chess to Jeopardy. But the leap between Jeopardy and Go is probably even bigger. And so part of that is around questions of what scientists would refer to as intuition. And so I'm hoping this one was, I'm going to move us ahead in this a little bit.
Gradient, a suite of tools for machine learning and AI developers. The platform was designed to make developing AI as simple as building a model.
You are watching. I'm going to move us to a certain moment in this text.
That machines can truly learn and think in a human way. AlphaGo's victory shocked experts in the artificial intelligence community. Many thought such an event was at least a decade away.
So firstly, a few questions. Why is this important and what's all the fuss? AlphaGo shows that machines can really learn. How so? Well, instead of using brute force to calculate all the moves it could make like previous AIs, AlphaGo used reinforcement learning and neural networks to mimic the learning process of a human brain. Keep in mind that the ancient Chinese game, Go, has as many more possible moves than chess as there are atoms in the entire universe. So there's no way of just calculating every possible move on the board. That's practically impossible. For this reason, Go is the holy grail of AI, and learning to do such a task from scratch is a huge feat. Further to this, DeepMind's creators say that the algorithm can learn many more things without alteration or guidance. In other words, the AI is general purpose.
We always used to talk about, well, if we could eventually crack Go and have a program that could beat the world champion, then we must have invented some generic general purpose algorithm. So maybe we're on the cusp of all of them. If you ask a great Go player why they play a particular move, sometimes they'll just tell you it felt right. So one way to think of it is that Go is a much more intuitive game, whereas chess is a much more logic-based game.
So what is DeepMind? Google DeepMind is a British artificial intelligence company that was founded in September of 2010 as DeepMind Technologies. It was renamed when it was acquired by Google in 2014 for $500 million. Interestingly enough, this was just after Facebook had just finished negotiations with them in 2013. And another fun fact, Elon Musk is actually an investor in the company, just to keep an eye on them, of course. DeepMind received the Company of the Year award by the Cambridge Computer Laboratory in 2014. So where did DeepMind come from?
So there's much more to study about DeepMind if you become interested in that. I'm using it kind of selectively here to pair two things. So first of all, you see what happens to that brilliant player personally, right? Like just what happens to him, right? Like so he would have spent his whole life preparing for this moment, and he's reached this level of human intelligence that most humans just can't. And so he's there. And then he was, the other thing, then the other side of that is the producer side, right? In which the people who have been working for DeepMind expected to work on Go for most of their career, right? So people who are 30 who were working for DeepMind expected that to be the central problem of their career, and then they got to it already, right? And so that's why I keep bringing up the right example of the flying, because we don't know, right? Like sometimes there's a lot of slowdown and then there's compression. Right? And so I would liken this Go contest and its effects, and you see how the Chinese government freaks out, and understandably, right? Its effects to, remember when we watched the DARPA challenges, and like it was a self-driving vehicle, and the best one didn't even make it a third of the way down the track, and then like a few years later, boom, right? Like everybody's off and running because there was a shift, right? Like there was a shift in investment. There was a development of human resource, like there was just a focus, right, on self-driving that like leapt it forward. That's, I think, what you're seeing here with this Go thing. And then the other piece that I think is really, really important is just that one sentence that he says, where he says, there are so many moves, you can't memorize the rules. We're used to machines that can memorize rules, right? That doesn't freak us out. The fact that most great Go players say, well, it just felt right. I think we need to pay attention to that, because one of the ways that we often say right now, well, humans are decidedly better at X than robots, is we say we're better at emotion, right? And we're better at intuition, and that those things are going to take a long time. Clearly Sophia's emotions are disturbing, like her angry face and her happy face are kind of, right? But like, once you get to intuition, you're pretty close to affect, So I'm going to come and see if we can hear you on my face. Okay. Yeah, there you go.
I just want to know about Go because I'm really stupid. I've not heard
Yes,
of
exactly.
this game. How long has it been out there?
Yeah, okay. Does anybody know a lot about Go in here? Because I don't actually know a lot about it. You know a little bit, Harriet? You what?
I did have one.
You have
once. I did have a Go once, but I don't know what happened to it.
Okay. So you tried it though?
Oh yes, I tried.
It's a very hard game, right? It's an ancient game. Yeah.
Carla, I've got the mic.
Oh, good, okay. I don't have to put my face in people's
Yeah, we, Harry the Over, is that on? Yeah. We do have a Go set, and in fact, it's in our storeroom, and my husband was inquiring about it the other day, because we used to keep it out. It's a game that, you saw the table, and you saw the white and the black, and you give your opposing player the white because they're much there, the feel of them. So it was sort of an aesthetic game too, the feel of the tiles. And the idea is, and this is just a very oversimplification, is to surround territory. And that's the basic game. And you see all the grids though and how many there are. And you can get obviously fooled and think that you're surrounding and then someone is surrounding you. So that's the whole game. It sounds easy, but it's easy to learn and very complicated to become at all proficient.
Thank you for the question, and thank you. We used a local Siri. We used Harriet as our local Siri. So we resisted the temptation to go to the phone and find out. we used the hive mind in the room, and that was much better than what I would have been able to explain. Okay, so here's Andrew Yang. I'm just showing you a picture of him because he'll be in Grinnell several more times. If you become interested in universal basic income, that is his platform. I'll tell you a little bit about that. This is him and I out at the Comfort Inn. He's already been to Grinnell a couple times. The students are very interested in him because he's talking about the deep income inequalities that their generation is particularly concerned about. So a couple of things about Andrew Yang. His proposition is that we should implement a universal basic income immediately. There are a couple of other candidates who would say the same, that the time has arisen that we should separate the right to live from having a job, right? And so we should have a universal basic income. His universal basic income is $1,000 a month to every person in the US, regardless of their other sources of income. So I would also get it. Even though I don't need it, right? Okay, so it's a simple platform. The thing that makes him noteworthy beyond that is that he wants to pay for it by claiming a citizen's share of these technological developments, right? So he pairs universal basic income with the coming technology and saying, like, if we allow the status quo to continue, literally less than 20 people on the planet are going to pocket the gold that comes out of these technological developments, right? Like literally it's going to be a list of humans that fits on one page. That's who's going to get all that money, right? And we can see that coming, right? Like that's Andrew's point. We can see that coming. And if you don't get a hold of it before it happens, right? You don't claim it as the right of more than 20 of those people, it is hard to get back, right? And so what he wants to do is implement a value-added tax on those developments so that when I lose my job to a robot, I at least get some of the money off of that technological development so that I can live a life of creativity and use and purpose, not some kind of mean life characterized by violence and being deprived of the right to live. So I think that there's something truly brilliant in his pairing of universal basic income with this awareness of where this technology is going. And the reason he said he developed it, and I think this is because it was very amazing to me to read his book, because he comes to all these conclusions that I come to after reading hundreds of books about the logic of capital, about Marxist theory. Andrew's not trained like that, right? Like Andrew's an entrepreneur. So I'm like, why are you landing in the same place that I'm landing? Like where I'm landing is logical, given my life, right? But like, why are you landing there? And the reason that, because now I've interviewed him and stuff, and he's gonna be a character in my book. But the reason he's landing there is he's an entrepreneur, and he was trying to bring brilliant young kids to the Midwest, to these towns like Detroit and stuff that are in great need, and he was implementing startups in those Midwestern towns. And then he was flying home. And home at the time was New York, Boston, or San Francisco, and he felt like he was living in two worlds. And he said, this is not the future that I want for my kids. Like, I don't want this country to be torn apart, right? By regions with no jobs, right? And then regions with the richest, most available talent and all of these, like those two divides. He wants those woven together. And so I think it's a very compelling vision. He also is very convinced, like I am, that we're undergoing the most important, kind of shift, technological shift in the history of humans. And so that when people talk about this in terms of other previous technological changes, they might be wrong. That might be not enough. So his first sentence in his book is, I am writing from the Silicon Bubble to say we are coming for your jobs. And you hear that a lot from AI folks now, where they're like a little worried about what they're working on in their labs. They love what they're working on in their labs, right? Like they've prepared to build these beautiful machines, but they are concerned about the social consequences of the machines that they're building. So you see people like Elon Musk, Facebook guy, and Stephen Hawking while he was alive, issuing some warnings. So here's Stephen Hawking. This is an open letter to the Independent in 2014. I hope I've given the impression that in this realm, 2014 and 2019 are very different eras, right? So this is Stephen Hawking being very prescient in 2014. Looking further ahead, there are no fundamental limits to what can be achieved. There's no physical law precluding particles from being organized in ways that perform even more advanced computations than the arrangement of particles in human brains. An explosive transition is coming Whereas the short-term impact of AI depends on who controls it, the long-term impact depends on whether it can be controlled at all. Again, writing in 2015, again in The Independent, he explained, before the robots become so powerful that they accidentally kill us, they might end up taking our jobs. Asked whether the rise of artificially intelligent robots could lead to technological unemployment, Hawking warned that it would depend entirely on how the extra wealth that they created was distributed. Everyone can enjoy a life of luxurious leisure if the machine-produced wealth is shared. Or most people can end up miserably poor if the machine owners successfully lobby against wealth redistribution, Hawking said. So far, the trend seems to be toward the second option, with technology driving ever-increasing inequality. And that's income inequality over time, the share of the top 1%. So to me, questions about artificial general intelligence are super important, but this is more important. Because this is in the short run, right? Like, we already know that we live in this world. And so if you add the kind of machine displacements and job displacements that I've been talking about to this existing profile, this does end actually with like civil-like wars and gated cities for the rich and joblessness, like broad spread joblessness. So I think that there is an opportunity in general, but especially around the next presidential election, whether it is just supporting somebody who is talking about this or making sure that your favorite candidate starts to turn their attention to these questions. Because I don't think we can have another presidential election where we don't even talk about this. Like, I think it's really foolhardy. And what happened in our last presidential election, from my perspective, which is part of why I got into this project, is resentment and anxiety around not enough work caused people to be looking for an enemy, right? And the enemy that they often looked for was like black and brown people, immigrants, that kind of thing. We need to get really clear that most of our jobs are going to be removed from us by technological developments, not other humans, right? And so I think there's a real politics to not talking about robots. Because when you don't talk about robots, then you just take your anxiety and you put it on another human, right? And so that's why I think we have some real responsibility as voters who live in Iowa. It's like being 3 voters living in Iowa, right? Like, I grew up in Minnesota, like the political capital that you have from just living in Iowa is amazing. There's a real opportunity that whoever your people are, whoever you support, whether you support Trump or the new candidates that are emerging in great numbers, pressing people to have an opinion about basic income, about value-added tax, about these incredible, this gold rush. This is a gold rush, right? Even if you take driverless cars and you only look at that, those billions of dollars to be had, right, from getting humans out of the driver's seat, we should have some say about what happens with all of that money, right? Because it's going to have job impacts. So that's the part that I think is really important, and the part that Andrew Yang really articulates carefully. I'm not sure Andrew's going to get the size microphone he would need to affect the election. So voters may have to take some of what they believe in and put it in other ways. So this is just you've probably seen graphs like this. The blue line is the top 1% and the red line is the bottom 50%. And given what I've been saying about the number of fields that robots could move into pretty easily, you can imagine this trend line and then it dropping, right? Like going pretty quickly down if the bottom 50% is now competing with machines. Okay, so our social lives with machines, we've talked about most of this. We need to look for examples of dependency and de-skilling. A lot of you have been saying, like, what can I do? And some of the ways that I like to think about this is, like, what kinds of conversations are we having with, like, the 12 and 18-year-olds in our lives, right? And just starting to make some of these things talkable. And instead of, letting kids be the authority on this, maybe really talking to them about the ethics of, I think there's something different about interacting with a human than with a computer, and this is why, and, kind of insisting on some of the knowledge that your life provides to you, right? So I think that's something. I also think we have to start thinking really creatively that notions of redoing the social contract, and what I mean by that is, like, do we get paid to work or do we get paid to be alive? I think many of us are going to have to work to open our minds to that. One of the reasons is, like, we've been hearing about a basic minimum income for a long time, right? But I think some of what I've been talking about over the last 4 weeks makes it urgent in a way that maybe it wasn't the last few times that it's come up. You know, like universal basic minimum income passed the House in 1971, right? So it's not a new idea. But I think forces are combining that would suggest that our social contract in which we scramble for work in order to live may have to be reconsidered. And I know that that is a very big claim, but I think we're going to have to be thinking in that way. And then I think, you know, I always bring up the Walmart example because if you shop at Walmart in town, you currently have a choice right now. You have a choice between helping yourself or going to a human. There will be moments like that, right? Moments when you can value something that's human-made, something that maintains craft or expertise, right? And there will be moments where you'll be able to do that. So I think that's a good place to end. Oh, and then this is the last thing that I want to say is, what happens often, and I totally get it, I had to fight it in my own mind, is that we think of computer science as something for a certain set of people who have climbed up a certain ladder of knowledge, and that's absolutely true. Like, I'm never going to be a programmer, and I can't explain to you how most of the things that we've been watching over the last 4 weeks work. I can't explain to you how they work. But I have a set of knowledge about interaction, about like what work means to a person, about the way that work is one of the sources of community building, right? It is through our jobs that we find affinities, we develop passions, right? So I can bring what I have to the table, and I don't think that that is intrusive, right, to the computer scientists. What I'm hearing from a lot of the designers and the inventors is some concern. I think there's almost like a come on in feeling about the ethics and the social consequences of the things that are very much on the edge of being ready to be deployed. So I also think that's something that you could encourage the young people in your life to do, and to use your own lived knowledge to ask, you know, just more multiple questions about artificial intelligence and the future of work. Thanks very much.
Karla, we have a check for you, but
yes,
but you don't get to keep it.
Exactly. But that's good.
It's one of those.
Yes. Thank you.
This check is for $50, and it goes to the Art Hyman Book Fund so that we can buy some more books for humans to read for the next 4 years. There are going to be actual books, I think. And we thank you so much for a really fascinating 4 weeks. Yeah, thank you.